There is something unusual about the liver. It can begin changing long before you feel anything is wrong. No sharp pain, no obvious warning, no dramatic moment that tells you something inside your body has started to shift. You can go to work, eat dinner, exercise occasionally, and wake up the next morning feeling completely normal. And yet, inside your abdomen, fat may already be accumulating in one of the body's most important organs. For years, this condition was commonly called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Today, doctors increasingly use another name, MASLD, Metabolic Dysfunction-Associated Steatotic Liver Disease. The name changed, but the mystery remained. Why are so many people developing fatty liver while they still feel healthy? And why does the same amount of liver fat appear to cause serious problems in some people, while others seem to experience little immediate consequence? To understand that, we have to stop thinking about the liver as an isolated organ, because this story may actually begin somewhere else. Why the liver matters. The liver is constantly working behind the scenes. It helps process nutrients from food, manages energy stores, produces important proteins, and helps break down substances the body needs to remove. You rarely think about it, and that may be part of the problem. Many liver conditions can progress quietly, without obvious symptoms in the early stages. That means a person can feel well while changes are already taking place. Imagine someone who goes for a routine medical checkup. They are not complaining about their liver. Maybe they came because of a blood test, a diabetes screening, or simply a regular health visit. Then an ultrasound or another test reveals something unexpected. There is fat in the liver. The person may immediately ask the obvious question, "How can that be possible? I feel fine." That question is at the center of the investigation, because having fat in the liver is not automatically the same thing as having severe liver disease. The real question is what happens next. From fat to something more complicated. For a long time, doctors used the term non-alcoholic fatty liver disease to describe excess fat in the liver when alcohol was not considered the main explanation. But researchers realized that the old name did not fully capture what was happening. The newer term, MASLD, places metabolic health much closer to the center of the story. That matters because fatty liver is strongly connected with conditions such as insulin resistance, obesity, abnormal blood lipids, high blood pressure, and type 2 diabetes. But here is where the investigation becomes more interesting. If body weight were the whole explanation, the mystery would be simple. Heavier people would develop fatty liver. People at lower body weight would not. But reality is more complicated. Some people with obesity do not develop advanced liver disease, and some people who are not obviously overweight can still develop significant metabolic liver problems. So the number on the scale cannot tell the whole story. Something else is happening underneath, the metabolic connection. Think about what happens after a meal. Food is broken down into nutrients. Glucose enters the bloodstream. The body needs to move that energy into cells where it can be used or stored. Insulin plays an important role in that process. But when the body's response to insulin becomes impaired, the system becomes more complicated. This is known as insulin resistance. It does not necessarily produce a dramatic sensation. There may be no moment when someone suddenly feels insulin resistant. Instead, metabolic changes can build gradually. The liver is deeply involved in this process because it is one of the body's major centers for managing energy. And when metabolic dysfunction develops, the liver can begin storing more fat. This helps explain why MASLD is not simply a story about eating too much fat. It is a story about how the body handles and stores energy. But even that explanation is incomplete, because two people can have similar metabolic problems and still experience very different outcomes. Which raises another question. What determines whether fatty liver stays relatively quiet or progresses toward inflammation and scarring? The difference between fat and damage. This distinction is crucial. A liver containing excess fat does not automatically mean that the organ is severely damaged. For some people, liver fat may remain relatively stable. For others, the process can become more serious. Fat accumulation can be associated with inflammation and injury to liver cells. Over time, repeated injury may lead to fibrosis. Fibrosis means scar tissue begins forming inside the liver, and if significant fibrosis continues to progress, the architecture of the liver can become increasingly damaged. In advanced cases, this can contribute to cirrhosis and serious complications. But not everyone follows that path, and this is one of the most important facts in the entire story. A diagnosis of fatty liver does not tell you exactly where an individual person's journey will end. Doctors need more information. They may look at blood tests, medical history, metabolic risk factors, imaging, and in some cases more specialized testing. The goal is not simply to answer, is there fat in the liver? It is to understand, what is that fat doing? The people who do not fit the stereotype. Now consider someone who does not look like the typical image of metabolic disease. They are relatively slim, they are active, they do not think of themselves as having a major health problem. Yet a medical evaluation reveals fatty liver. This can seem surprising, but body size and metabolic health are not identical. Genetics, body fat distribution, insulin sensitivity, diet, physical activity, and other biological factors can influence risk. Even where fat is stored in the body may matter. Two people can have the same body weight while carrying very different amounts of visceral fat, the fat stored deeper around internal organs, and their metabolic health can be very different. This is why researchers have become increasingly interested in what happens beneath the surface. The scale gives you one number. It does not give you the whole metabolic story. The silent progression. Perhaps the most unsettling part is how ordinary the early stages can feel. A person does not necessarily wake up one morning with a warning that their liver has accumulated more fat. There may be no dramatic symptom. Years can pass. Meanwhile, other metabolic conditions may develop alongside it. Blood sugar may become harder to control. Blood pressure may rise. Cholesterol patterns may change. Physical activity may decline. And because none of these changes necessarily feels dramatic at first, they can be easy to overlook. This does not mean every person with these factors will develop advanced liver disease. It means the liver may be participating in a much larger metabolic story. And that changes the question we should be asking. Not, why did this person suddenly get fatty liver? But, what has been happening inside this person's metabolism for years? The genetic piece. There is another suspect that cannot be ignored: genetics. Researchers have identified genetic differences that can influence how people store and process fat in the liver and how vulnerable the liver may be to injury. This helps explain another part of the mystery. Two people can have similar lifestyles, similar body weight, similar levels of physical activity, and yet their livers may respond differently. Genes do not determine everything. They are not a simple prediction of who will become seriously ill, but they can alter susceptibility. And that means the story is no longer just about personal behavior. It is about biology, environment, metabolism, and time interacting with one another. Still, there is one major question left. If fatty liver can remain silent, how do doctors know when it has become something more serious? Because the dangerous part may not be the fat itself, it may be what happens to the liver afterward. And in the next chapter, the investigation moves from fat accumulation to fibrosis, disease progression, and the clues doctors use to determine who is actually at greater risk. The mystery now looks different. Fat in the liver is only the beginning of the investigation. The harder question is whether that fat is simply present or whether the liver is beginning to react to it. Because the liver can contain excess fat without immediately becoming severely damaged. But in some people, a much more complicated process begins. Inflammation can develop, liver cells can become injured, and over time, repeated injury can lead to fibrosis, the formation of scar tissue inside the liver. This is where the story becomes more serious. Not because every person with MASLD will develop advanced liver disease, they will not, but because doctors need to identify the people whose disease is more likely to progress. The clue hidden in fibrosis. Fibrosis is not the same thing as having fat in the liver. It represents a response to ongoing injury. Imagine the liver as a building that has been exposed to repeated damage. The body attempts to repair that damage, but when the process continues for too long, scar tissue can accumulate. At first, the changes may be limited. Later, fibrosis can become more extensive. And when advanced scarring disrupts the liver's normal structure and function, cirrhosis can develop. This is one reason modern liver medicine pays so much attention to fibrosis. The amount of fat may tell part of the story, but the degree of scarring can tell doctors something much more important about long-term risk. And this creates an unexpected twist. A person can have a lot of liver fat without having the most advanced disease. Another person may have less obvious fat, but more significant fibrosis. So the question is no longer simply, how much fat is in the liver? It becomes, has the liver been injured enough to start building scar tissue? Why some people progress and others do not. This is one of the biggest unanswered questions. Researchers know that MASLD does not behave identically in everyone. Age matters. Metabolic health matters. Type 2 diabetes matters. Genetic factors matter. And the pattern of disease can also be influenced by other health conditions. But there is no single switch that determines progression. Instead, multiple factors can interact over years. One person may have metabolic dysfunction, but relatively little liver injury. Another may develop inflammation and progressive fibrosis. And sometimes the difference cannot be understood from appearance alone. This is why the idea that fatty liver is simply a disease of people who look unhealthy is misleading. The liver does not reveal its condition from the outside, and neither does a person's body weight tell the complete story. The diabetes connection. One of the strongest clues researchers continue to investigate is the relationship between MASLD and type 2 diabetes. These conditions frequently occur together, and their relationship appears to work in both directions. Metabolic dysfunction can contribute to liver fat. At the same time, fatty liver can be associated with a higher risk of developing metabolic problems. This does not mean fatty liver automatically causes diabetes, nor does diabetes guarantee that someone will develop advanced liver disease. But together, they can create a metabolic environment in which the liver deserves closer attention. And this may explain why a liver problem can sometimes become visible before a person realizes how much their overall metabolic health has changed. The liver may be acting like an early warning system, but even that analogy has limits, because the liver is only one part of the larger system. What doctors actually look for. If someone is suspected of having MASLD, the investigation does not end with a single blood test. Doctors may consider the person's medical history, metabolic risk factors, laboratory results, and imaging. Sometimes they use non-invasive tools to estimate the likelihood of significant fibrosis. One example is elastography. Instead of looking only at the amount of fat, elastography can help assess how stiff the liver is. The reason this matters is simple. Healthy liver tissue is relatively soft. Significant fibrosis can make the tissue stiffer. It is not a perfect measurement, and it does not answer every question, but it gives doctors another piece of evidence. The investigation becomes less about guessing and more about assembling clues. The problem with symptoms. There is still one major obstacle: symptoms. People often expect serious disease to feel serious, but liver disease does not always work that way. A person can have significant metabolic liver disease and still feel relatively normal. Fatigue may occur in some people, but it is not specific. And the absence of obvious symptoms does not prove that the liver is completely healthy. This is why medical evaluation matters when risk factors or abnormal findings raise concern. The body does not always send a dramatic alarm. Sometimes it sends a quiet signal, and sometimes that signal appears in a blood test before the person feels anything at all. The weight question. Now we return to one of the biggest misconceptions. Is fatty liver simply caused by being overweight? The answer is more complicated. Excess body fat can increase the risk of MASLD, but weight alone cannot explain every case. Some people with lower body weight can still develop metabolic dysfunction and fatty liver. This is sometimes described as lean MASLD. The term can be useful, but it can also create confusion, because lean does not mean metabolically healthy. A person may have a relatively normal body mass index while still having insulin resistance, abnormal blood lipids, visceral fat, genetic susceptibility, or other risk factors. So the investigation has to move beyond the scale. The liver does not know what number appears on a bathroom scale. It responds to biology. The lifestyle question. This is where health documentaries often make the story too simple. They show a plate of food. Then they show someone exercising. Then they announce that the problem has been solved. Real biology is rarely that neat. Diet and physical activity can influence metabolic health, but individual responses vary. Genetics matter. Existing disease matters. Age matters. Medication and other medical factors may matter. And the evidence does not justify turning one food, one supplement, or one routine into a universal cure. The goal of a serious investigation is not to find a magic answer. It is to understand which factors actually change risk and which claims have moved beyond the evidence. The more hopeful part. And this is where the story takes an important turn. MASLD is not simply a one-way road toward liver failure. Some of the factors associated with metabolic liver disease can be improved. Changes in physical activity and metabolic health can affect liver fat and overall physical function, and medical research is actively investigating treatments aimed at different stages and mechanisms of the disease. That does not mean everyone can reverse every stage. Advanced fibrosis and cirrhosis are different situations from early liver fat accumulation. The liver's ability to recover depends partly on what has happened and how advanced the disease is. So the earlier the problem is understood, the more information doctors have to work with. And that changes the emotional meaning of the diagnosis. Instead of, something terrible is happening, the more useful question becomes, where are we in the process? The mystery is not completely solved. So why is fatty liver rising in people who feel healthy? There is no single explanation. Changes in metabolic health are clearly important. Body composition matters. Insulin resistance matters. Type 2 diabetes matters. Physical activity, diet, genetics, age, and other biological factors can all interact, and for some people, several of these factors may be operating at the same time. But there is still uncertainty. Researchers are continuing to study why some people develop severe fibrosis while others do not. They are investigating genetic differences. They are studying the role of the gut, metabolism, inflammation, and other biological pathways. And they are testing new ways to identify disease earlier and predict who is most likely to progress. That uncertainty is not a weakness of science. It is part of what science is designed to uncover. The final clue. The most important discovery in this investigation may be the simplest one. Feeling healthy and having a healthy liver are not always the same thing. But the opposite is also true. Having fatty liver does not automatically mean that someone has severe liver damage. There is a spectrum. At one end, there may be excess liver fat with limited immediate injury. Further along, some people develop inflammation and fibrosis, and at the most advanced end, severe scarring can lead to cirrhosis and serious complications. The challenge is identifying where an individual person actually sits on that spectrum. That cannot be determined from a YouTube video. It requires medical history, appropriate testing, and professional interpretation. So if someone discovers they have fatty liver, the most useful response is not panic. It is investigation. What caused it? Are there metabolic risk factors? Is there evidence of fibrosis? Are other conditions present? And what does the available evidence suggest about that person's individual risk? Those questions are much more meaningful than simply asking whether the liver contains fat, because the real mystery was never just, why is there fat in the liver? It was, why did it happen, what is it doing, and what happens next? And that is where modern medicine is beginning to find better answers. Not every silent change becomes a serious disease. But when the body gives a quiet signal, understanding that signal early can make all the difference. If you have persistent concerns about fatty liver, abnormal liver tests, or metabolic health, speak with a qualified healthcare professional who can evaluate your individual situation. The liver may be quiet, but it is not invisible, and sometimes the clues are there long before the symptoms.